The Tom Woods Show, episode 1288.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Hey folks, it's my job to equip you with the strongest arguments for the libertarian position on issue after issue where you tend to get cornered by your friends. Well, deregulation caused the financial crisis is still a big one 10 years later as people reflect on those terrible times. Very, very important to smash this one with a baseball bat. And I've got just the baseball bat for you. It's my free ebook, The Deregulation Boogeyman. Grab it over at regulationmyths.com. Hi everybody, Tom Woods here. I am joined today by Kevin Matthews, who is campaign director at Decriminalize Denver. And their goal is to decriminalize the possession, use, and manufacture of psilocybin mushrooms in the city and county of Denver. And this is a world that is completely unknown to me, but our friend Michael Heiss of the Mises Caucus of the Libertarian Party brought Kevin and this organization to my attention. So I started reading about it and about what researchers are saying, and I became very interested in the subject. So I thought, well, you know what? I got a podcast here. I got a microphone. Why don't I get Kevin on? We'll talk. So Kevin, welcome.
Hey, Tom. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our work with your audience. It's a pleasure.
I'm really interested in this. My friend Michael Heiss brought it to my attention, and he seems to be right generally. So I listen when he makes a suggestion. So I've been looking through this, and it looks like, to a layman like me anyway, the results of various clinical studies are very, very promising here. But I'd like to start off actually with a little bit about you. You don't have a medical background, and yet you are playing a major role in promoting the decriminalization. Now, I'm curious to know how that came about. Was there any way that your life was directly impacted by this?
Absolutely. I was a cadet at the U.S. Military Academy from 2005 to 2008, and it's all I knew. I spent a big majority of my life working to get in there. Spent 3 years there and ended up getting an honorable discharge and medical retirement due to major depression. And after my time at the academy and when I left, it was one of those things where I was like, who am I? What am I doing with my life? I had my life planned out as a career military officer, and so I was really on this search for self and meaning, and floated for a couple of years as many veterans still do after my time in the military, and landed in a community in Denver that introduced me to a lot of things. And one of those things was psilocybin mushrooms. And mushrooms have had a tremendous impact on my life, personally, in terms of really healing my depression. In many ways, mushrooms have saved my life. What they've done for me is provided a gateway to a new perspective for me to look outside the box of, or be able to see outside the box of this kind of gloomy, gray world that depression tends to create for a person. And my experience with mushrooms gave me a new lease on life. And I'm not really your typical psychonaut. It's not something I do very often. However, yes, they've impacted me greatly and still do to this day.
Now, this is very interesting. Now, you're talking to a guy who has zero experience with anything like this. I've never smoked pot, never done any of that stuff. I sure have been around it given the kind of concerts I go to, but that's about it. But I do know two people who absolutely swear by exactly what you just said in their own cases. They say that mushrooms saved my life. They say that. So is this something, first of all, that in order to keep the results going, now you say that you don't use them very often, but, well, how often? I mean, in order to maintain the results, what kind of a regimen are we looking at? I assume it varies from person to person.
It does vary from person to person, and it depends on what they're going for. For me, it's a rare occasion. The more important part of the experience, I mean, the experience is extremely profound. It can be challenging for a lot of people. Equally so, it's the integration period afterwards. It's how do you take what you've learned, what you've experienced, the insights and the kind of the lens into different parts of your life. How do you take that and start to actually transform your life? Psilocybin mushrooms have been shown to actually create new neural pathways, which is what I like to say about giving somebody a new perspective. And so the opportunity is there to take the experience. You go on a trip, and then if you're respecting the conditions and the environment, and you have a right intention for their use, the after effect can be profound. But it is work, and so it does vary from person to person. And I mean, I don't use them that often, but I do have friends who use them much more often than I do. And it's something that in most of the cases and most of the individuals I've spoken with, everyone pretty much agrees. Like, this is a compound. It's a drug. It's a tool. It's a technology that we can use to better our lives.
Is this habit forming?
No, it's not habit forming. Psilocybin is clinically shown to be non-habit forming. And it's also, according to the Global Drug Survey, actually the safest recreational drug. And in fact, it's anti-addictive. Some of the clinical research has shown that there's promising clinical research that shows that it actually helps with alcoholism, with tobacco addiction. And this is one of those things where we need to investigate this more. We need more research. We need better access and safer access for individuals and for organizations to conduct the research.
All right, I want to go through in just a minute. I have a bunch of links to studies and different areas in which scientists have been finding good results, that it's helped people in different kinds of ways. But I want to stick on this line of discussion for just a minute, because I don't know how to, maybe it's kind of like trying to describe sight to a blind man, or hearing to the deaf. You don't even know the language you would use to convey it. But how could you describe to me, a total non-user, what the experience is like?
In many ways, Tom, it's ineffable. Many times words don't do it justice. Personally, for me, I've had some challenging experiences. And those experiences are important because they shed light on my own personal issues, and the challenging experiences are just as important as the experiences that bring us joy or where we experience bliss. And I know that we might be getting into some of this kind of woo-woo territory here, right? But essentially, if you look at long-term meditators, individuals who've had experience of meditation over decades, psilocybin and other classical psychedelics have very, very, very similar effects. And scientifically, there was some research that was done by an organization called the Beckley Foundation. And what they discovered is that psilocybin essentially deactivates what's known as the default mode network in the brain. And what that basically means, that the default mode network is, and again, I'm no scientist here, so I'm explaining this the best that I can, but it's essentially what we experience as ourselves in our normal waking reality, in our day-to-day routines and processes and habits and patterns. And that becomes ingrained, and that's what essentially creates our personality or our sense of self. And what mushrooms do is they temporarily shut that down. Mushrooms, it was thought originally that mushrooms create a lot more activity in the brain. And from this research, what they actually do is they turn off a lot of that brain activity. And it really gives the brain and the mind an opportunity to rest, and also in many ways start to create new connections and new neural pathways. Different regions of the brain can communicate a little bit more effectively with each other. And so it's believed that's what creates the hallucinations, because different parts of the brain might be able to communicate more effectively. You can look at it in the way of one of those kind of old school phone switchboards where you've got all these wires that are plugging into a big switchboard, and psilocybin temporarily pulls out those wires. And that's when those wires are pulled out. Imagine the wires being all of these neural pathways and neural connections that you've basically made throughout your entire life. When those get pulled out, that's what can not only create that perhaps temporary feeling of a challenging trip, right? But it's also what can lead to that sense of unity or deep belonging to the world, to nature, to reality. And then from there, the opportunity is to start plugging those connections back in different ways that can basically improve the way that we look at ourselves and the world. And so we can start to make different choices.
Tell me about what we're learning in terms of other uses for psilocybin. Like, for example, not just depression, but what else?
Yeah. So first of all, psilocybin just received what's known as breakthrough therapy status. There's an organization called Compass Pathways that creates GMP compliant, good manufacturing processes, compliant synthetic psilocybin for clinical use. And that designation was given in light of the phase 2 clinical trials that are currently undergoing, looking at psilocybin as an option for treatment-resistant depression. So that's one area where there's been a lot of promising clinical research. And then perhaps the most profound research that's been done so far was conducted by researchers at Johns Hopkins University. And they were looking at psilocybin as a treatment option for individuals with life-threatening or terminal illness who were experiencing existential distress, knowing that they're going to die. They're facing their mortality. And those studies were incredible because a very significant number of individuals who are participating in that not only came out of the experience fully accepting the fact that they were going to die, fully accepting their mortality, but they also said that it was the most profound spiritual experience of their entire life. And, we have this almost kind of backwards view in our culture regarding death. It's something that seems to be experienced behind closed doors, and in many cases, at least from doing a little bit of research here, these individuals were at peace knowing that they were going to die. And then there are other studies looking at alcohol addiction, tobacco addiction, and surprisingly, cluster headaches as a pain management tool. And I've heard a number of cases, some anecdotal reports from individuals as I encounter them on the street who say that, yeah, this is the only thing that works for my cluster headaches, or this saved my marriage. This is the only thing that works for my depression. I'd like to actually take this opportunity to share a little story about an individual who's a friend of mine, a friend of the campaign. He's currently prescribed psilocybin under the Federal Right to Try Act that Trump signed into law last summer. And this is an individual who has tumors all up and down his spine and in his brain and multi-symptom PTSD. And he's been with his psychiatrist for over 20 years. He's had the same medical team for over a decade. And he just started using psilocybin with a doctor's approval back in March. And his protocol is basically 1.5 to 2 grams taken every 7 to 10 days. And the results from him using psilocybin mushrooms over the past 7 or 8 months, he told me his psychiatrist said it's nothing short of miraculous with his change in behavior, his ability to interact in society almost like a normal human being. So much so to the point that his entire medical team is starting to document this entire process for him. And it's a little bit of a gray area because although he has a prescription from his psychiatrist to use psilocybin, he still has to source it himself, which is one of the reasons why we would like to decriminalize psilocybin in Denver. And then additionally, the really cool thing about it is that he gets to actually manage his own protocol and take responsibility for his mental health and wellness. And so on days where he feels like he might need a little booster dose, because one thing psilocybin does is it really puts you in touch with your body, and you really get a better sense, I think, of what you need and when you need it. And so he gets to manage his protocol. And, listening to his story is, I mean, it's just such an honor that we get to work with him, and then he gets to share his experience with us.
Can you explain just a little bit more what you mean by he has to source it himself?
Yes, so he has to either grow it himself or turn to the black market to acquire psilocybin mushroom.
So you're telling me that in his case, they would look the other way if he bought from what would be obviously otherwise an illegal supplier?
That's
Not
the
sure I'd want to
issue
test
we're
that theory.
facing here.
Yeah.
I know that's the issue we're facing here. I don't really know if, say, the federal government would look the other way. I get the sense they probably would, but there's a problem there because, what about the source, right? Like, this individual is actually prescribed this, and I'm sure his psychiatrist really went out on a limb here, risking in many ways his licensure. I'm not sure if the federal government would look the other way, even though Trump signed this right to try act into law.
Yeah.
And what that law says is that anybody who has a life-threatening illness or terminal disease can utilize any substance that's passed a phase 1 clinical trial through the FDA. So, yeah, I'd be very curious to see. I don't know if I necessarily want to see, but I'd be curious to see how some of these authorities would respond to that.
Folks, let me take just a minute to note I am all about learning as much as possible in the least amount of time. And we all have a million books we want to read. We can't get to all of them. And a way to cope with this problem is with an app called Blinkist. It has books in all nonfiction genres, whether history, philosophy, productivity, and time management books. The idea of Blinkist is it takes these books and it distills them down to the most important parts so that you can absorb that book in under 15 minutes by reading or listening, all on your phone. With Blinkist, you'll expand your knowledge and learn more in just 15 minutes than you can in almost any other way. Plus, you can listen anywhere. I'm always taking my daughters somewhere, so I listen a lot in the car. The Blinkist library is massive, from timeless classics like Think and Grow Rich to current bestsellers like Skin in the Game. Right now, for a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/woods to start your free 7-day trial. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist, Blinkist.com/woods to start your free 7-day trial. You can cancel anytime. Blinkist.com/woods. Well, I'm reading here that Johns Hopkins, pending the results of their upcoming phase 3 trials, has recommended that psilocybin should be federally reclassified from Schedule 1 to Schedule 4. Can you explain what that actually means?
Sure. So a Schedule 1 substance is a substance that has no medical value and a high risk of abuse. And then a Schedule 4 substance is basically on the same level as prescription sleeping aids. So it's incredible because the clinical research makes it very, very clear that psilocybin is physiologically safe. It does no harm to the human body, and it's in fact anti-addictive. So there's no risk of abuse with this. Because they're very powerful substances, there are risks associated with it. It's actually a contraindication for individuals who have a bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or a genetic predisposition to any of those disorders to use psilocybin. But it's pretty clear from both the clinical and the population studies that psilocybin doesn't belong anywhere near Schedule 1 designation.
I also read therapy-assisted psilocybin sessions were able to help longtime smokers quit smoking, and long-term follow-up found nearly 70% remained off cigarettes, which is a pretty good result. So tell me about exactly what Decriminalize Denver's, I hate to use the word demands, but yeah, demands are.
So Colorado is one of I think it's 23 states in the union where citizens can actually initiate an ordinance process to change the law. And so with our ballot petition, with our language, we are decriminalizing the personal use and personal possession of psilocybin mushrooms for adults 21 and over. And personal possession includes the propagation or cultivation of mushrooms at home. And, Colorado has a very strong history of drug policy reform. Obviously, we have the cannabis industry here. We were one of the first states to have a medical model for cannabis. And in fact, Denver was the first city in the country to decriminalize the adult possession of cannabis back in 2007. And so we took that language and used that as a model to draft something that would be accepted by Denver elections and also palatable to the people of Denver. And so what we're doing is making psilocybin mushrooms not only a lowest arrest priority in the city and county of Denver, but included in our language is we're defunding the city. We're preventing the city from using any of its resources to actually prosecute individuals who might be arrested for psilocybin in the city and county of Denver. And also taking it one step further, we really want to develop a relationship with the city. And so a part of our language includes the formation of what we're calling the psilocybin mushroom policy review panel, which will be basically a committee at the city council level that'll be composed of members of city council, some members from our team, and additionally law enforcement, city attorneys, and health professionals. So this is something where we really believe that in many ways Denver can become somewhat of a sanctuary city for this, where individuals can both possess and use psilocybin without the fear of needing to constantly look over their shoulder, worrying about criminal penalties. And then also our main goal here is that we want to keep people out of prison for this. A very small amount of psilocybin equates to a felony in Colorado because it is still a Schedule I substance. And so we're in many ways taking the path of cannabis and starting here with decriminalization and then creating a context for Denver, for Colorado, and for the rest of the country where we can actually start having a real conversation about this and recognizing that there's a very strong grassroots movement behind this. We don't necessarily want to wait for the federal government to reclassify psilocybin in many ways because we have a mental health and addiction crisis in our country, and psilocybin is an extremely viable solution for that.
Maybe the one uphill battle you have here is that a lot of people have used marijuana, and because they've used it, it's harder for them really to be gung-ho about throwing people in jail for it. Whereas mushrooms, the very word sounds exotic and dangerous and edgy. And so
Right.
I don't know if I want to go quite that far. So do you meet with a lot of resistance?
We don't, Tom. Now, granted, we're still in the signature collection stage, and so we don't know who our opposition is yet. However, we did some scientific polling last summer and discovered that we have a 45% support rate from Denver residents for this. And not only that, a 45% support rate, there are 20% of individuals who are a maybe. And so we're looking at potentially 65% of individuals in Denver who would support this. The very interesting thing about that scientific polling that was done was that these were all individuals who still happen to have landlines in their home. And, I'm a millennial, so, I remember landlines, but I sure don't have one. And so it just goes to show that, it seems so far, both from our polling and from collecting signatures, that we really have a lot of overwhelming support for this. People are excited when we meet them on the streets to not only sign the ballot petition so that we can make the ballot next May, but also they're saying, how can I support? How can I get involved? What can I do for you guys? Because this is something that's important to people. And I think Denver's ripe for this because, again, Denver's this nexus of a lot of different cultures. We have a lot of different worldviews and viewpoints here. You could almost say that Denver is becoming this cross section in many ways of the entire country. And what we're finding from engaging the population is that this is an issue that reaches across both sides of the aisle. We've partnered working with a veterans group called Veterans for Natural Rights. And, this is something that's very important to them. Veterans for Natural Rights really made their statement back in 2014 in regards to cannabis policy for veterans and using cannabis as a tool to heal from PTSD. Whenever we talk about veterans, we're almost reaching every single family in the U.S. and traditionally, much more conservative individuals. And then we have drug policy advocates and individuals who want to keep people out of prison for drugs and create new programs and new paradigms to basically provide opportunities for individuals to get the help and support they need. So drug policy individuals and activists and organizations as well. And so this is in many ways, it transcends the aisle and is an opportunity here to unify a lot of people under psilocybin decriminalization and essentially drug policy reform.
What can my listeners do to help you, listeners both in Denver and outside of Denver?
For your listeners in Denver, we have a strong volunteer group. We're about 30 people strong for our volunteers. And so if you're in Denver, we would love your support in terms of being a volunteer for our campaign. We have 8 weeks until the deadline to turn in our signatures. We need 4,726 valid signatures from City and County of Denver registered voters. And we're shooting for about 10,000. We've had a handful, 6 or 7 individuals over the past 3 weeks, and we've been able to gather over 2,600 signatures. And so we're going to hit the mark. And so if you'd like to volunteer with our campaign, we would love that. And we're highly organized. And then alongside that, you're spreading awareness about our campaign, reaching out to our campaign, reaching out to me personally, either on Facebook or over email. I'm so open to talk about this and make as many new connections and contacts as possible. Our website is decriminalizedenver.org. And on Facebook and Instagram, we're at Decriminalize Denver. And then for individuals who are not in Denver, we would ask that you follow our socials and spread awareness by sharing our message if this resonates with you, if it's something that's important. Because this is something that really, even though right now we're hyper-focused in Denver, we hope to spark a national conversation around this. And yeah, we need all the support that we can get because, it's a sensitive issue. And our goal here is to, in many ways, rebrand the image of psychedelics, focusing on the health and safety and the risk and the benefits, and then also the clinical research. So we're an open door here. We're open to anyone's feedback, their criticism. Being able to engage the population is very important because our job here is to really be an education platform as well.
Well, I'm really interested and impressed. And by the way, I like the website, decriminalizedenver.org. It's not crowded. It doesn't look like somebody designed it with, he just learned how to turn his computer on, which a lot of these websites wind up looking. It's got just the right amount of information without overload, just very attractive, exactly what you want. So people should check that out. I'll link to it at tomwoods.com/1288. And I'm glad to get to know you. I'm glad to hear about, I guess say this is like a world I don't inhabit at all, but now I'm glad I know more about it, and I hope things turn your way on this.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and let's do it again after we make the ballot.
That'd be great. I'll have you back. We'll talk.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's going to do it for today. If you enjoy and appreciate what I'm doing, I hope you'll consider becoming a supporting listener of The Tom Woods Show. You get many, many benefits, not the least of which is membership in my now notorious private group. And I know you'll want to be in there. You'll get to meet some wonderful people, and you'll learn a lot, and you'll be able to vent, and it's just many, many benefits of that. But there are many other benefits apart from the group that you get as a supporter, because I really, really appreciate people who support the show. And you can do that over at supportinglisteners.com. See you tomorrow.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.